Throat decibels abusing lobotomies. Music becomes a consumer commodity. Fetishized lives till you dream their doorstep. Free adverts for martinis and Porsches. Colonized raps, Italian sources. They sell hollow asses, that's Trojan horses. Most def told us who's running this rap shit. Most definitely still running this rap shit. Old white men and corporate forces. Couple years back ride white hoods and torches.
Welcome to One Dime Radio. I am excited to be here with Artin Salimi, probably my favorite content creator on YouTube because he's one of the most unique creators I've ever seen. He does a mixture of rapping about philosophy and left politics. When I say rapping, I mean literally full-on rap songs and handcrafted rap music videos that are surprisingly very, very good. They're excellent. I can't emphasize enough. I give the utmost praise. The intro song that you just heard for this podcast is by Artin, and he's also featured in my most recent video called The Culture Industry, How Capitalism Ruined Hip Hop. Artin, why don't you introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and where people can find you?
Hi, well, thank you for that very generous introduction. I really appreciate you, and thanks so much for having me on the show. My name is Artin Salimi. You can find me on my YouTube channel. Just type in Artin Salimi, and I'm on Instagram as well. Happy to be here, man.
Yeah, I found I had you on the podcast last time, and it was actually really fun, organic conversation. We just got into hip hop and stuff, and there's like so much we could have got into. We'll probably get into today, but for those who don't know, what exactly type of content do you create, and what is your process about going about it? Because it might be hard for some people to imagine what rapping about philosophy, or specifically left-wing philosophy, is like.
Right. One of the things that really got me into philosophy or general critical theory in general was often artists like Akala or Immortal Technique. When you hear a lot of their stuff, you can read a lot of theory, and in that theory there's going to be one or two lines as you're reading that kind of hit you, and that kind of creates a certain perspective that changes you. And I felt that that was very much the case with a lot of the music that I was listening to, and I felt like there was that aspect missing in a lot of philosophical discussions, the kind of artistic side, the musical side, like that kind of sticks in your head without you having to kind of push through pages and pages and pages of theory. Is this one line that basically is able to condense it in a repeatable form. Of course, reading through the pages is very important, but I'd like to create kind of lyrical mantras that represent philosophy and philosophers. And yeah, that's mainly the aim, is just to kind of connect theory with art and music and to create something fun, hopefully.
I was always thinking to myself that somebody should make not just music in general, but hip hop music specifically. Well, obviously about left politics, that's kind of been done, but I mean like philosophy from like left politics beyond a surface level, and that's where the philosophy obviously is very helpful, right? The critical theory.
Yeah.
And you do like songs as well as philosophy instrumentals, which are like sort of what I call them video essays, but like you make these like really cool instrumentals and then explain like an argument from a key philosophical text. And in the songs, it's just like, it's like a cool rap with like really detailed rhyme schemes that kind of convey at least one of the main messages of that. And I thought that was really interesting. Probably my personal favorites of at least the philosophy instrumental series was the Foucault and Iran, the one which has
nice.
Beautiful instrumental. The instrumental is amazing, and it's like
thanks, man.
A cool explanation. And the Lukács one on Nietzsche is also really good too. And in terms of the songs, there's so many, but probably I'd say my favorites are the Gramsci, the one on hegemony,
yeah.
and what's happening in Palestine and Israel. and probably the Camus one is really good too. The Baudrillard one I'd highly recommend. Max Stirner, that one is that one is sick. That one's is so dope. Like, and just in terms of like being a song, it works really well as a song. And probably though my ultimate favorite one, like as a song, is the collab you did with Space Babies, who's the only other, yeah, it's like the only other left wing philosophy rapper. I don't know what category to put him, but like the only one who does kind of what you do on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm having him tomorrow on the podcast as well.
Nice.
That collab you did with him is just crazy. I actually like unironically play that song just because it's like so dope.
Space Babies is super nice on the mic, man. He's really good.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, no, it's both you guys are super underrated. I'm surprised, to be honest, that both of you haven't blown up yet. That's why I really want to do what I can to at least get some of my viewers and listeners to check out your stuff, because I can't emphasize enough like how underrated this stuff is. Sometimes what I have a suspicion of, and this ties into actually the theme of my recent video about standardization in music, about how a lot of the cultural products we are exposed to, at least on the mainstream level, are heavily standardized, one-dimensional. I think when people are used to that kind of stuff, they're almost they are deterred from looking elsewhere for stuff that is novel. And sometimes even when they see stuff that is experimental, that does not follow the same music formulas, they're almost it's too weird for them. Do you ever feel like that sometimes? Like people are just kind of deterred by what they don't understand or they're not used to?
Yeah, absolutely, especially in a genre like hip hop. And there's quite a lot of pressure for people who are creators of hip hop music to, in a way, conform to that ideal and to make music that kind of fits in with that particular narrative. And so there's always, with a lot of artists, there's a sort of compromise that you have to reach where either you go too experimental or you kind of have, or it's, as you said, very one-dimensional. And I find that a lot of artists try and kind of find the right blend of the two, where it's not so out there, but at the same time, it's not, very one-dimensional. And that balance is often quite difficult to find. But yeah, I myself, I'm very much into more of the experimental dimension, as it were, but when I'm writing the lyrics, I also have to keep in mind that this is meant to make it easier to understand something, not more difficult, so I can't make the lyricism very cryptic. What I'm saying? It has to actually be pretty open, but that is a struggle in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Like, I really thought that things like, I'll say rap, but also in general, music, artistic production is something that really needs to be bridged more with the insights of critical theory and philosophy that are often just really reserved to like the academic realm. And that's the problem, right? A lot of the time is they're really hindered by the obfuscation that comes with academic writing, is to make things overly complicated. And they're often, they're really not accessible sometimes to, the wider masses. But, and I think there's a lot of,
in a quite elitist way sometimes as well.
Oh yeah, and that's very gatekeeping, in academia, to the point where even like writers who sometimes are known for being more accessible, like Mark Fisher, are like disliked by academics because they're accessible, which just shows you the snobbery. But the problem, it's really a tragedy, I find, because a lot of the findings in critical theory and philosophy are incredibly useful, like for us to understand. And just anyone who's looking to understand the world and interpret it and change it, it's all really useful. And obviously, people can find ways of learning things in more, simplified ways, through like summaries or YouTube videos, podcasts, or whatever. But I find art can also convey things in more direct ways and
Oh yeah.
in ways that resonate in a certain way that convey things. Like let's say this. Immortal Technique is probably one of my favorite so-called conscious rappers. Like when I say conscious, I mean really, really, he knows his stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
he tells like history in his rhymes sometimes.
Exactly.
I think sending someone like an Immortal Technique song, like let's say the Third World, that's one of my favorite songs by the Immortal Technique.
Incredible beat.
Yeah, that song can really convey to someone a whole lot more faster than maybe listening to 4 hours of Noam Chomsky lectures, which will tell you the same thing, right?
Right.
Or reading, I don't know, Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti. Like
Right.
they can just listen to that and they got the picture, you know?
Absolutely. And that's the kind of it's the opposite of gatekeeping. It's almost like a gateway, actually. You listen to something and a line or two really hits you and you're like, okay, let me find out more about that. Let me find out more about this history that's being spoken of. And again, that's anti-elitism. It's like, no, this can be shared by everyone and everyone should be able to understand it. And then if you're more motivated to learn about it, then it provides an opportunity to look deeper.
Oh, 100%. I think the way I like to look at it is like you said, instead of gatekeeping, we should be having gateways. And that's kind of what I like to at least describe what my YouTube content is for. And it's like a gateway drug and a gateway drug
right.
to radical politics and like learning the stuff for themselves. Like I can definitely envision that with your content as well. As like people might see, you know, a song about like Gramsci, right? And they'll be like, oh, this is kind of dope. You know, I might actually read this.
Read that.
And it can really, it can popularize things because it's just, it has a cooler, I think, more powerful gateway effect than, you know, just in a snobbery gatekeeping way to be like, oh no, just read 3 volumes of Capital. Like you have to do that, you know?
Yeah,
it's a way to, I do like, so I talk about in my most recent video is like the problem with mass culture. While it's good that the internet has given access for everybody to create and consume culture, the problem is there's a lot of standardization and one dimensionality. And unlike Adorno, right? Unlike people like Adorno and a lot of academics who are kind of snobbish and they only uphold a certain type of very bourgeois art. Like, you know, for him, it's like Mozart and Samuel Beckett.
Yeah.
That's like the same.
Seeing jazz as like a downfall of music kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we should be doing is like, you know, experimenting with different types of artistic production that is accessible to the masses, right?
Right.
And that's like the kind of, I guess, bridge that I think is really useful. And in your videos, your music videos do an excellent job about that. And I'm really curious though, is with your videos, the music videos particularly, you have like these interesting animations that look kind of like they're handcrafted. What is your process for making those things?
So the process usually goes, I have the first thing in terms of the music videos that are rap songs is the beat or the instrumental. That always comes first. And so if people might have noticed in the Baudrillard music video, for example, the whole sample is of, you know, when we were growing up, there was that dial-up internet tone, right? And it's just that chopped up. And then that inspires the lyrical content. And it's just like whatever I've read from Baudrillard, and then it's just simplified into these verses. So if I'm doing a philosophy hip hop episode, then it starts with a beat, then come the lyrics, then I have to kind of mix that and ensure that it's it's audibly good enough. And then from there, it's picking, as I'm listening to it, images kind of come in my head and how it's supposed to look. And from there, it's literally just hands, it's printing the pictures, the images, cutting them out, gluing them onto something more solid like cardboard. And I have a chair that I have stuck a selfie stick onto and putting my phone there and just click, 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 just just stop motion, essentially, just moving them. Every movement, you take a picture and then you kind of put it all together on, I use Final Cut as the software, and just kind of editing that. And that's the most difficult bit. It just takes hours of just like just ensuring that every single clip goes well. And so it's all handcrafted. And I think that's kind of the most rewarding, because when it comes together, it's cool. But it's also the most difficult aspect of it. But I'm trying to push, as in it's within every like 3 episodes, you can see that I'm trying something new. I don't want to just keep doing the same thing. There's always some element that I've added every like 3 episodes that's just not the same as it was, kind of thing. And hopefully by next year, you'll notice a huge difference between what's being produced now. And I'm hoping to move it to more creative directions. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, I can't imagine how much time that takes. I always thought that you would probably just have those images cropped in Photoshop and then kind of animating them in the software. That's what I would have done.
Yeah, honestly, that's how like people like South Park are able to make an episode a week, right? It's just they have all that system set up to kind of push through. But I honestly find it very meditative. Like you're just kind of like, hands and crafts kind of thing, like cutting the material and just making them move and all this kind of stuff. It adds a whole element to the video itself. It adds a handcrafted kind of thing where it's literally just things moving around, basically. It means that it's not as high definition, but there's something about it, I feel, that's it's paper, right? And it's just making paper move and making birds talk and whatnot. And it's that's the aspect of it I find quite meditative.
You mentioned how you kind of come up with these things and then the lyrics as you're reading. I always thought to myself, there's a lot of rappers who sometimes rap artists who have good and intelligent lyrics, but sometimes that only really scratch the surface at something. And I feel like suffer from just a lot of, analysis without theory suffers from it is the kind of surface level analysis. And that I always thought their whole like picture would be like so much more nuanced if they just like read certain theorists. Like, for example, who comes to mind for me is Childish Gambino and his album, Because the Internet.
Yes.
Yeah, that album, it touches on like a real phenomenon that is extremely important, like the whole idea of the digital panopticon and the fact that we kind of enslave ourselves and spy on ourselves through the internet by surveying each other. He has that line in the song World Star where he says, "We're all Big Brother now." And he also kind of, he talks about, he touches on sort of the idea of the spectacle, but it does fall, it's kind of surface up, right? The analysis. And I felt like if Gambino like stumbled on Baudrillard or Guy Debord or someone like that, it would just change his life. Because I remember how those texts like totally changed my view of so many things, or how you'll have that with a lot of things is you will have often people in general, I think, when they analyze problems, they'll resort to sort of individualism and not look at the structural component of society, which is where theory can be important. Like there's this line in a Joey Badass, he's often known as a conscious rapper, but he has a lyric that I absolutely hate when he says, "We can't change the world unless we change ourselves."
Oh yeah, there's loads of that, and but that's just isn't that like the whole ethos that's kind of given, and it seems like a very kind of self-evident truth, right?
Yeah, it's maybe a product of neoliberal ideology, right? Or
absolutely. Yeah.
But that's the thing, is a lot of people will see the certain problems, but they'll fall short right on that. You mentioned one of the rappers you're inspired most by is Akala. He's also one of my favorite rappers. Talk about a guy who knows his theory and history.
Oh yeah,
that's absolutely. A rapper who's like, I mean, he writes full-on books. I believe he has his book out called Natives.
Yeah.
And I noticed in terms of your rhyme schemes, which are really good. I was pretty surprised. It's because I'm a bit of a, as my Twitter handle suggests, a rap nerd. Like I've all my life I've listened to people like MF Doom, Earl Sweatshirt,
right.
People who have really complicated rhyme schemes. And I noticed that Akala is probably one of the best there is a certain, maybe it's because he's British, but he has a similar accent, but there is I notice you take a certain influence from his rhyme scheme. I'm curious who, including him possibly, how did you learn how to rap? Because that's like a tough skill for anyone who's tried.
I'm very bad at rapping, actually. My main thing in itself is poetry. I started out with spoken word, and that was where you're not confined to any instrumental. There's no metronome that you have to abide by. Basically, it's almost like jazz. In a sense, you can extend a certain word, and every word can have its own flow. You don't have to. You're not chained to boom bap. But then I loved the challenge that a beat presents, right? Because spoken word, you can kind of go into all these kind of different directions. But I loved rap, I loved hip hop, and one of my really good friends, who's also a rapper, Godamit, God damn it, definitely check him out.
Sick name.
He's phenomenal, and he's a phenomenal rapper. And he was the one who really kind of told me, like, no, like when the beat drops, that's when you start rapping, or like every song has a BPM, and all these kinds of very basic things. And it's a lot of songs of mine that I haven't released but will soon. They start out as poems. So it's actually a spoken word piece. And then I listen to a beat and I kind of jag that into the 4 bars. But it's really difficult for me. It doesn't, it at the start, I was absolutely horrible at rapping. Ask any of my friends, they'd be like, please stop doing this. And it was really through a lot of work, and it's like a muscle, the more you train it, the more proficient you become at it. But a lot of my influences, I would say, definitely Akala, low key, those two, absolutely. Earl Sweatshirt, definitely. Kendrick, Cole, all the classics. But yeah, what I really enjoy is anyone who can flip something that's normal and just make it incredible. I think that's really cool. That's really cool. Where you take like one word and then you just kind of create. Lil Wayne does that a lot, where he's able to just take one word and just rinse the double entendres out of it.
It's actually
Yeah.
true. I'll give credit to Lil Wayne. It's like Lil Wayne, content wise, is like probably one of the worst rappers there is. But in terms of like just his skill at rapping, he's undeniably like good. Like in terms of
Absolutely.
his when he's at his best, like he has a lot of that's the thing about Wayne, right? I would say he's put out so much music in his career is like 90% of it is terrible. But when he's at his best, he's like
Is
the top
yes.
tier. Like
Absolutely.
are you aware that you know that verse he has on the ASAP Rocky album on M's? I think it is.
Right,
Uh,
right, right.
yeah, Lil Wayne has like a absolutely insane verse. He also is really good on that Tyler album on the
Oh
Cherry
yeah, yeah,
Bomb,
yeah, yeah.
Smuckers.
And thingy as well. In his recent one, he has a recent in Tyler's
Yeah, I
Call
haven't
Me If
heard
You
it
Get
yet.
Lost. Yeah, 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 yeah. Very good shit. Really good shit.
Yeah. I mean that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize with rapping is like you don't realize how hard it is until you've actually tried. Is because it's one thing to, be able to write good lyrics, good
Mm,
rhymes. I've tried that, but as soon as I said them out loud, you realize how hard it is to have like a good flow, a good voice, a good delivery,
mm. Yeah,
cadence and all that. The biggest thing is flow, right? Is that's that's hard to master.
for sure, for sure.
I can imagine it. Space Babies is flow, I'll say, is fucking insane. I
Molasses. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
don't know
Really,
how I got
really.
that. Like, yeah, it might seem like some people who haven't been exposed too much to rap, it might just, sound like whatever, but like the people who've listened to rap, if you see anyone who hasn't been doing this for a long time do it well,
Mm,
it's fucking insane. It either takes a ton of hard work to even get good, or there's some people,
yeah.
who are just born with insane
Talented.
flows.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
like Biggie
Absolutely.
Smalls, right? Apparently, like Biggie Smalls,
Exactly. Yeah,
he didn't even
yeah,
give a
yeah,
fuck
yeah.
about rapping. He was just like selling coke, and he just like casually would rap for fun, and he was just insanely good.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the things that a person who never listens to hip hop will appreciate, but they don't know what it is they're appreciating. You know what I'm saying? They'll just be like, man, this sounds really good. But they won't know that it's actually the rhyme schemes and the way that the words are being presented is actually what's hooking them in. They're like, oh, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, there's so many components that just go into like the art of hip hop is obviously like the beats, um, the sampling, the delivery, the flow, the lyricism. To me, there's some rappers who excel differently on the different things, right? Like Biggie Smalls is known for the flow, right?
Yeah.
I would say, someone like Tupac, right, doesn't really have the most complex dynamic flow, but he has
Yeah.
probably
It's
the
the
best
content.
delivery and the content.
Yeah.
Amazing delivery and content is this.
Voice, confidence. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I have a video on Tupac actually about his communist politics when he was younger. Um, but yeah, no, it's such a thing that it takes one to really be immersed in that whole world to appreciate. Now there's a lot of from people who just don't know much about rap. Uh, there's often this perception, I would say, especially among elitists, academics, but also I would say bourgeois people, is that there's this kind of they look down on rap. It's this kind of thuggish music genre that doesn't have any content to it. It's just about selling drugs or consuming drugs or
Yeah.
doing something. What part of rap do you think, or like, is missed? What do people misunderstand about it? And is there a kind of revolutionary, transgressive aspect to it that is often unnoticed?
It's a good question. I think that if I'll give you a quick example, and I'm actually interested to hear your thoughts on this as well. So right now there's like crazy beef in the Iranian hip hop scene, and the beef is between groups who are kind of against the regime and other groups who are pro-regime, right? And a lot of these pro-regime rappers are actively involved in, getting money, essentially. You know, they're state funded, a lot of them. And they're the ones who are talking about very materialistic things, alcohol and parties and all this kind of stuff. Whereas the anti-state rappers are very critical, and they'll send, and they're constantly kind of going back and forth with each other. But one of the interesting things that I've noticed is that the groups who are being accused of being kind of government funded, they're like, so what? You know, there's no shame about it. Essentially, there's no assertion that there's anything shameful about what they're doing, even though the anti-government guys who are rapping are like, no, this is fucked up. What you're doing is fucked up. And I feel like it's a really great metaphor to the whole of kind of the politics of hip hop globally. It's like, at a certain point, if someone called another person like, you're a cokehead, that was an insult. Like, that was a big deal. Like, you snort cocaine. But nowadays it's like, yeah, so what? You don't? You know, it's a mentality where everything goes. And in that dimension where everything goes, and it's just about kind of reference to your hustle video, it's all about grind. It doesn't matter what the fuck you're talking about. It doesn't matter about the content. As long as you're making money, you're cool.
Oh yeah, I talk about that in the most recent video, actually. The culture industry video is the whole get the bag ideology, right?
That's it.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is, how it's done, you know, as long as that's the thing.
I mean, I think it's very much a product of what Adorno calls instrumental reason. Is like the what dictates our reasoning is stuff that is instrumental progress, like the accumulation of wealth and stuff like that. I noticed that too with. So in the beginning, with the whole rise of so-called mumble rap, right? You know, very overly commercial rap that has, like, you know, often lazy. Like, I'll say there's some. It's hard to group everybody. Like, there's some who are more artistic than others, but there is, like, you know, there's rappers out there who make they make like 100 songs a month. Like Lil Uzi Vert, apparently he makes like him and Young Thug. They make like so many songs a month, like very low effort compared to you know, a lot of other rappers out there. And initially with this rise, there was a lot of, you know, the older hip hop fans and the older rappers who really did not like that, and they rallied against it. But slowly over time, they kind of capitulated to the idea that, okay, I might not like it, but they're getting the bag. So as long as they're successful, they're getting the bag.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And I think it misses the whole thing, right? It's like they're not really so much bad morally because they're making low effort standardized music. It's the fucking system that incentivizes it, right? And I talk about that in the video. Is, I mean, before there was always the thing with the radio music, in that they'll try to appeal to, they'll set it, there'll be a standard that is set, and then they'll just appeal to that whole standard. So that's how standardization happens. Is there'll be a kind of need that is created from above, and then the rest of cultural products for a while will be pandering to that need. Then there'll be a ruptural shift. Then standardization occurs again. But I think that it's worse now because of streaming. Because streaming,
right?
That's the biggest thing. Is I think they count only the first 30 seconds of the song to be played as a stream. So people are incentivized to like start their songs off with a climax, like with the hook. Like Post Malone is a perfect example, or the Migos, you know?
Right.
And I think it and because of that, there's less incentive to create full albums that are cohesive, have like a theme or anything. It's just you're making a bunch of singles that grab people's attention, and also resort to the most like I would say base level instincts. Like, for example, it's like stuff that is just like extremely loud and gets your attention and gets stuck like in your head.
6ix9ine type stuff.
Yeah. Or I mean, just take like 808 beats, right? Is 808 beats, like if you look at them from a purely musical standpoint, I don't know. I mean, people will say music's subjective, sure, but like from a pure, they're just objectively easier to make, right? Like you can recreate 808 beats much easier, and it takes less creativity than like let's say, finding a sample or finding multiple samples and then
right.
trying to place it together, which is a lot of how early hip hop was made. And I think, yeah, with that, because it gets stuck, it's really like marketing. Music becomes marketing with these incentives, right? Is marketing, it doesn't seek to persuade you on any rational level why to buy a product. It just seeks to plant ideas in your head. And I feel like that's how a lot of, not all music, obviously there's still a lot of good rappers even on the mainstream level, but there's obviously like a dominant current of that kind of music that I would say is just simply like marketing. It's just there to like play in the background, like elevator music, like gets stuck in your head.
But that's the kind of irony that is that, you mentioned that there's a certain idea of rap as being stupid, as being lesser than other types of music. But a lot of what gets called bass level rap basically is using the exact logic of
mainstream
that structure, and it's interesting that, as you say, there's a bourgeois understanding of economics, and then there's the superstructural cultural aspect that comes out of it. But that first 30 seconds in becoming very good at marketing is part of that economic logic, which creates that kind of music. So there's a very strange irony behind that, I think.
That's an excellent point, because it kind of it debunks the idea that hip hop is innately lesser than other forms, because hip hop became more, I would say, standardized and worse as it actually conformed to what the mainstream standards of music were. Like, for example, we can take the biggest example, I mentioned this in the video as well, is the late 90s with the shining suit era, and the later with the bling era in the 2000s. Is what was that really? Was that innate to hip hop? Not really, actually. It was actually kind of the music tunes were starting to sound more like pop hits, and that's when it started getting played on MTV. Like P. Diddy, right, heavily played a role in popularizing this sort of stuff, and also kind of instead of like really showing like the struggle of the hustle, it was more about just looking at the rewards of being a rapper, right? Like showing off how like all the cool clothes you can buy, all the cars and all that stuff. It does. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it conforms to that sort of, capitalist ideology. And it's really a departure from rap, right? So people who look from the outside in, they will see, oh, just because rap is a little bit more upfront about it, like they're more upfront about the bragging, but the sort of bourgeois culture is in a lot of music in general. We can see this in pop music. It's just a little more subtle sometimes. Or the misogyny. It's like the Beatles, perfect example, right? The Beatles had totally misogynistic lyrics, but they're just, or Led Zeppelin, and there are plenty of examples of Led Zeppelin, but like they're just not as obvious with it.
Or there's no attention to it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and less attention to it. So people associate hip hop with that, but the irony, right, is that hip hop became more like what we think of its caricature as it submitted to this standardization, like with also just the way music was made. For example,
just at that point as well, is I feel like a lot of it is down to survival as well. We have to remember, that people need to eat. There's once there's incentive to produce a certain type of music, if you're seeing that a certain way of rapping or rapping about a certain context will make you able to feed yourself and feed your family, there is that pressure to do so, and there's always the economic pressure that is put on people in that respect. And I feel like that is that's the angle of get the bag that actually does make sense in a way, that if you're in a condition and you're trying to get yourself out of a particular condition, there is, what I'm saying, there's nothing can judge that. Basically, it's only a problem when it's taking the piss. Like there's no survival at any point. It's literally just greed. I feel like that's the bit that
Mhm. Well, it's a slippery slope, isn't it?
Mm.
That's well, there's definitely the economic incentives, right? Is well, part of how hip hop just emerged in general, why sampling emerged was because you know, a lot of people growing up in Black communities didn't have access to the musical technology that a lot of other people did, and they couldn't get the record labels. So sampling jazz was like a way to do that, right? And the thing is, in the 90s, there was the whole clamping down on copyright when labels started to really target people who would sample music. Like, for example, De La Soul, their whole basically career was kind of sabotaged by this. Yeah, so there is these incentives, right, to sign for record labels. That was the big thing, especially in the late 90s and 2000s, when a lot of labels were just throwing their money at it. And also because to make, you know, music videos, because MTV was really hot at the time, you're kind of incentivized to really you know, just glorify the wealth and all that stuff. So yeah, like the spectacle, basically, like it's representation, it's you know, showing is more important. Yeah, so the incentives are definitely there, but where I think there's a slope between getting the bag when it's the music kind of completely devolves. I know there is it's hard to avoid the incentive that comes with signing with a record label, right? Because when you're signed with a label, you're expected to make a certain type of radio hit that conforms to a certain sound. They're very rarely willing to take risks. Like, it's not just that with hip hop, but all music. Like we see, for example, the movie about Queen, about how Bohemian Rhapsody was initially rejected, and they thought it was too risky. Even if people might actually like this song, you know, it might be a fantastic song. Sometimes labels won't even be willing to take a risk of anything that deviates from like the standardized structures.
Absolutely. So, like, that's the one of Akala's famous statements on this is, you know, Low Key sells out tours, he sells out tours, Immortal Technique sells out tours, yet none of them have a radio single. It's obviously not because it's not popular. You know what I'm saying?
Or because it's not good, right?
Yeah, because it's not good. Exactly. Then there's another aspect to, you know, that's in play.
I know, and there's this idea that like some, you know, marketers, capitalists will try to rationalize like certain type of music by saying, oh, it's just what people want. But I think that's highly misleading, because often taste and demand are cultivated. So like you'll see songs played on the radio, it's really top down. And people will get stuff stuck in their head, and I'll just kind of like, spread. Like, for example, there's plenty of, you know, I would say industry plants, we call them, right? Is people come out of being signed to record labels, they have all the connections through the radios, and they kind of get their stuff heard. And it's really inorganic. You know, you have plenty of examples of this, but like just, you know, Pitbull, right? Like the epitome of radio music. Like, why is he popular, right? He makes probably, I would say, the most definition of standardized songs. Like, and it conforms to a standard that's already previously set. Whereas you might think of all like the Bohemian Rhapsodies that didn't come out, right? That didn't get heard or didn't get heard. That could have been like major hits. People might have really liked them. And no, this is, and to a certain extent, I would say the internet was a really good rupture of this. And I do talk about that too, is with the internet, we were allowed to hear a lot of stuff that and became really popular that probably might have not made it pre-internet. Like I would say all of TDE, like Kendrick Lamar, Schoolboy, Absol, and especially Odd Future, you know, like Tyler and Tyler the Creator. People like that, really, I don't think would have stood a chance in like the early 2000s. So that the internet was good, but then I think what ruined it though more was like platformization, because then that's introduced a whole new set of incentives, right? We see this with Drake. Drake is like the pinnacle of this. Is Drake, you know, I'll say about Drake, you know, I don't really think, I think Drake's super standardized, but I would say at least he made like pretty decent standardized music for a certain period. And we can see the shift, like with, I think, was it Views? One of those albums where he started in the age of streaming. It was just like, all it was a it was like a playlist of a bunch of songs that just kind of conformed to different things that were already popular, like kind of co-opting Caribbean type of tunes, and then UK type of tunes, and then different type. Like it was pure marketing. That's what I view it as. Like,
and that's I don't know if you've seen Tyler recently had a interview on Hot 96 where he's basically talking about DJ Khaled. Have you seen that?
DJ Khaled, yeah, he's in the thumbnail of my next video. Or of this video. And
one of the things that he said was, I don't know if you remember this, but DJ Khaled was going off of the fact that Tyler beat him in the BET Awards.
Yep.
And he was like, who the fuck listens to Tyler? Which club have you been to who listens to Tyler? Nobody listens to Tyler. Da, 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 da. And Tyler's response to DJ Khaled was, this is a guy who based his whole personality on being number one, right? We the best. Mm-hmm. And so when reality didn't conform to his ego, it was a shattering moment. And I feel like a lot of artists have a particular identity, right? So someone like Drake, for example, has to be selling out. It has to be number one. It has to be. And once there's that identity of being that person, the music and the form in which you receive it will reflect that. So it's very. So what you're saying about Views is absolutely right? Because he wants loads of number ones. He doesn't just want one number one.
And he has to adapt to also the new standards, right, of Spotify. So that's how he sold so much, is because they count record sales differently through streams. So that's kind of why Views was structured a little bit more like just a playlist, right? Instead, and it's no coincidence why we see Post Malone being like one of the top selling artists, because he makes albums that are basically like that. They're hardly albums. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like how Adorno, I think one of his best insights is when he says the culture industry often transforms art into cultural commodities. So it's like a commodity that is basically, requires a certain degree of marketing to sell it. It's not an expression in itself. It's a logic of accumulation. And like you're saying with these artists who become number one, and they have to keep, getting that number one again. I think, part of it is psychological for sure. Like there's the identity of being number one, but it's also, I think, the logic of capital accumulation, because these artists, they all have like the labels behind them, and the labels, they're an investment. They invest in them as an investment. And when you invest, you expect like higher and higher returns. It's kind of like the stock market, right? Is, can have a certain stock keep going up, but as soon as it has like declining rates of profit, it doesn't survive that. Sometimes it can recover, but it'll often fall downwards like crazy. It's like that's the logic of capital. It has to just keep going up and up. DJ Khaled is probably the epitome of all of that. Just like of that, like the worst. Like I think late capitalism personified. Just because like not only in a just the type of music he makes, I think for him really, like for some artists it might be a little bit blurry as to whether they make like quote unquote art or cultural commodities. There's a lot of artists who will have like those moments of like really good songs, but then they'll have like these terrible radio singles like but then there's, for DJ Khaled, I think there is no line. It's just completely get the bag, conform to whatever is popular, just rehash that. And I think, what separates the great artists is the ones who kind of force people to reevaluate their tastes. And sometimes,
of course, they challenge things. You know what I'm saying? And because otherwise, what's the point? You know, if it's just a bag, you know what I'm saying? And I feel like everything you're describing right now, it makes sense as to why someone like Al Sweatshirt, for example, just cut from the scene in general. Because
Mhm.
you're putting yourself in his shoes, and you're like, shit, you know, this is the situation, this is the reality that I'm in, this is the culture that I'm in. You know, the way in which I'm looked at as a stock option, you
Yeah.
know, and that's a very, very violent thing.
Yeah, exactly. And these type of artists who do escape, they reject the kind of the dominant music scene, like, or if you want to call it Hollywood. They still
Yeah.
can survive off touring, like you said. They have you can
Hmm.
develop like a fan base who really appreciates that kind of music, and they can still survive off that, right? But the thing is when you're in the Hollywood scene, you're comparing yourself to all the big number ones, so you have to be as standardized as possible. And that's why I think it's so rare to see artists on the mainstream level make like truly non-standardized music. I think an example of this, like there's these rare ruptures, right, that make people reevaluate their taste a little bit. But I would say like Kendrick Lamar
Hmm.
is I wouldn't say, you see, J. Cole is like popular, but he's not really on the radio, right?
Yeah.
He's found a way to be successful, but he's not on the radio. But Kendrick Lamar has found a way to be on the radio. And some of them, I think he doesn't make standardized music at all. But I think after having a certain level of number ones, he almost, for a brief moment, almost caved into that with the Damn album. He has a couple of joints on there that are a little bit like Drake songs.
But that's
Um,
exactly, I feel like that's exactly, because his previous one was Pimp a Butterfly, right?
Oh,
And
amazing.
that, and which is like the greatest. But that's, I feel like with, I don't know who, I think it's Absolu said this, which he said that Damn was like him proving to himself and everyone else that he can do that too. You know what
Hmm.
I'm saying? Just being able to be like, well, actually, I can do the to Pimp a Butterfly stuff, but I can also make hits like Loyalty or Humble and all this
I
kind
hope
of
he just
stuff.
doesn't do that again. But
Well,
I'm glad he I'm glad he
yeah,
proved it. Because
yeah,
because the thing is
absolutely.
like I think he did do that. He kind of really put Drake in his place, because I remember he had that little beef with Drake, right? Is
Hmm.
Drake was like, "Oh, you weren't getting number one," and Kendrick just showed how easy it is to do
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
it's not hard. It's not really that hard to do the whole standardized pop hit thing, and
For sure.
it did show. Yeah, I think I get why he did that. I get why he did that. I just hope his
Uh,
next album though is like, you know,
it's yeah, it's looking to be pretty crazy. And his last album on TDE, which is I have no idea why that is. I'm very curious to find out. Um, but yeah, he Kendrick really perfected that actually with Good Kid, Mad City, because the singles that came off of that, everyone, which was like Backseat Freestyle and Swimming Pools, you know, everyone was scratching their heads. They were like, why has Kendrick done this? Why is this going to be a very like you know, it's going to be a shift away from what he was producing? And then when the album came out, you're like, oh,
yeah,
he
true.
did
And
everything.
and to be fair, I think when Kendrick did those songs like Swimming Pools, is he like, yeah, he used the standardized structure, right, the three chorus
Mhm,
formula and
mhm,
whatnot,
mhm.
but he kind of in that song mocked the whole sort of the whole culture,
Yeah,
like the whole
it's so
drinking culture.
interesting. It's
So
so
I
interesting.
thought it was really clever. Like there's sometimes there are those moments where you can use standardized formulas, but still pack in like a content wise a song that's completely not standardized. Like
Mhm,
I talk about that in the video as well. Is like Andre 3000's Hey Ya is a perfect example.
mhm. Where's some
Or
deep shit, and then
yep.
people are like just dancing to it.
Yeah, and Gambino too, right? With Feels Like Summer. Uh,
Mhm, mhm,
and
mhm.
I think he has a couple others. Oh yeah, This Is America, although that's hardly even standardized.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not standardized at all, actually. But yeah, is that I think that's something that is overlooked too. Is, there's this debate whether music is subjective. I think whether one likes something is subjective. but something standardized, you can tell just by the formulas, right? There are like certain formulas that are heavily repeated. And I would say for the most part, like just in my opinion, most standardized music is not that great, but there are moments like where people can make like standardized music and it be filled with like really interesting stuff and have its unique flair, like the examples we mentioned. Now, I would say though, the internet though gave birth to so many non-standardized acts who were able to make a living. But there's one struggle that even a lot of underground artists go through is when you get reliant on a fan base, sometimes you have to pander to that fan base, right?
Yeah.
And unless you get a reputation of like always reinventing yourself, kind of like Tyler does, right?
Right.
But there is that risk, right, where one can kind of capitulate to an audience. And this is not just, I would say, music, it's on YouTube. A lot of YouTubers, when they blow up, they start to become the same. They make the same shit over and over again with the same formulas because they have a recipe for success. That's like we were saying, it's another product of the system. How does one deal with that? Should one just establish a reputation of always reinventing themselves so that they can't be held to no expectation?
But I think it's impossible not to. I feel like any artist who, and this is one of the curses of having a really good first album, is that suddenly you, in your second and third album, you try and reproduce a moment, but it was just a moment. It's gone. It's impossible to reinvent that.
Ice Cube.
Ice Cube, Nas, a lot of new Nas album is incredible, but Illmatic being that pinnacle and but also a curse at the same time, which for a while that seemed to be the shadow on Nas's career, for example. But a lot of heavy metal albums, they started off really good, but now rehashing and trying to create the new moment. Anyway, my point being that it's impossible to actually have the same formula. It's because people are constantly changing, and the art should reflect that change. No one is the same within a 2-year period. The things are constantly
some
evolving.
People, when they get rich, right, sometimes they have less to rap about. That's the thing. A lot of is the dilemma a lot of people talk about.
Right.
Nas talked about that actually, like how he got rich like super young, right? So
right.
Less inspiration.
That's the Eminem dilemma, where now he's just an emotion doing word acrobatics.
Oh yeah, Eminem is probably the perfect example of like how not to evolve as a rapper.
Precisely.
Because he just tries to recreate all those old moments and just
exactly. But that's my main point, is that to any artist that's listening now, is that reinvention isn't a process. It's not something that you force. It's just inevitable. You change, your taste change, things are constantly moving, and I don't feel like there should be a resistance to that. It's actually more difficult to try and do the same thing, basically. But as you mentioned, people have to eat. So
True.
if they find that a fan base is like really reacting to one thing and not so much another thing, it makes sense that they're like, oh, I need to make more of that stuff because that was good.
There's one of the key examples I find that is really interesting case study regarding what we're talking about is Jay-Z, because Jay-Z's first album's incredible, and he talked about how he was able to make so many good albums. In an interview, I think it was with Zane Lowe, where he said that it was because he didn't get into rap till he was like 27, and he had he had
life.
He had a lot of life experience to write about. Yeah. And also, what I found interesting is even after so many albums, his 444 album, which is one of my favorite Jay-Z albums, he found a way to rap about like changes in his life. He found a way to like rap about being a dad.
Mm-hmm.
Like make it cool.
Jay-Z is an alien in that respect. He's a very special person in that regard.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I think what it shows is though, to rap about how one is evolving, whereas I think a lot of people don't do that. They just try to capture that old moments, right? They'll try to be their old self, or sometimes they'll completely, fake it. They'll make some shit up. But another thing, what is interesting to me is, I think what can also help is to not just like rappers, but artists of all kinds to, think outside of themselves, to talk about things that are outside of their own life experience too. Because obviously there's only so much one can rap about themselves, right? Without it getting old, or sometimes there isn't much to say, right? If not is changing. And it reminds me about, just bringing it back to philosophy a little, is Slavoj Žižek, someone we both like a lot. He was asked about what he thinks about the whole self-help culture scene and Jordan Peterson, and what he would give advice on someone trying to like figure themselves out. And he said, do not focus on yourself. Commit yourself to a new cause or something. He said, like, commit yourself to cause outside of yourself. Because there's only so much you can, like, how can you really find yourself? Everyone's constantly changing. And sometimes one can really get, lost if they try to, have like this idea of a stabilized identity. So he was saying, like, think about something outside of your cause. And he talks about how the perfect example is the amount of suicides after the fall of the Soviet Union is because so many people like didn't have meaning, right? They had like some kind of cause, some kind of meaning. A lot of people just were completely lost after their life. Similar thing happened in Yugoslavia too. Yeah, but it's that's something where I find interesting to bridge, back with the left politics and the philosophies. I think, not just rappers, but in general, a lot of people will find probably more content to express, things to express, if they kind of look outside the world, right?
Absolutely.
Instead of looking inward. And that's something I find what you're doing and what people like Space Babies are doing is really special, because it's something I would like to see become like maybe a trend. Although there, of course there are people who do that already and been doing that, but I wish that was like more of a thing. I think that's what made Kendrick's album so good, right? Is To Pimp a Butterfly wasn't even about him really.
It was a juxtaposition of totally deeply him and not him at the same time, which is life, right? Like life is very impersonal, but it's very personal at the same time.
Yeah, and it was bigger than him, right? It was about, he rapped in like other people's perspectives, the whole black struggle. I thought that was interesting. Is
sure.
Now, just to get into philosophy a bit, which I would say not just philosophers, but theorists, critical theorists, inspired you the most and how you think?
Ooh, good question. I have moments, like Baudrillard was definitely one of the guys that it was like a good 6 months where my thought process was very much linked to him. Foucault played a really big role. Derrida played a really big role. A lot of early century mystics, Hafiz, Khayyam. Who else? It's one of those ones where basically I wouldn't say I have like specific favorites. I have moments with certain philosophers, and then it kind of develops into other branches. But I think Foucault had a really big influence on me.
I can tell.
Specifically the kind of whenever there's this aspect of a person that tries to push forth this idea of neutrality,
I that's something in my personal work, I won't get into it too much, but like is about that. Don't get me started on the fucking poli-sci and international relations people who think that things can be neutral and non-biased. Oh my God.
Yeah,
that's what I like about Foucault, right? Whereas people like Marx and Lenin critique liberal ideology for not being, it can't really realize the freedoms that it posits, that it says it will. Yeah. But whereas Foucault, he kind of says liberalism is not just impossible in practice; it's impossible in theory. Like the liberal subject doesn't exist; the rational, capable of being neutral subject.
Oh yeah, definitely. Which is this kind of stuff always depresses me because it's exactly what is everyone's entrenched in at the moment, which is the rational thinking person without any. And again, this goes back to kind of what we talked about with regards to hip hop and markets. It's just like making rational choices based on markets, and then you just insert yourself in there, and you reason with the circumstances, and you create, that kind of stuff. It's just it really gets under my bone.
Mm-hmm. I can see how you'd probably be also influenced to a certain extent by Nietzsche, because you have him in a lot of your songs too. I mean, he's a guy with a lot of his problems, as in that, as showcased actually in the Lukash hip hop instrumental video, where you kind of talk about how Nietzsche's class background made him kind of like, have a bit of an aristocratic ideology, but he's also makes so many good points, which Foucault takes influence from, about narratives, right? The idea of grand narratives, and like modernist assumptions of progress, right? And although we can see a certain Nietzschean impulse, like probably the thing, I think it has its good and bad, but the Nietzschean impulse of the will to power, right? To fuck the morality, to kind of to pursue life, not deny life. We can see that a bit in the get the bag ideology, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, it's like, I think so. Like a lot of the boomer dads who will be like, I hate the youngins who are out here making this music. They'll do the wrong thing and critique them on a moral, individual level. Whereas from the standpoint of the person getting the bag, they'll be like, well, other people are doing this and this is the system, so I might as well fucking do it. I see. Whereas I think the more appropriate thing is to, critique the system, right? And raise awareness on that. I mean, it's always why I think the structural critiques are so important. And we can see, though, the Nietzschean impulse with someone like Jay-Z and Coke rap in general, right? Is someone like Jay-Z's music, why I always liked it so much, is that it doesn't, you, like you said, is back in the days that you would be an insult to be a consumer of drugs. Yes. But because back in the day, it was selling, that it was something that was kind of like a necessity. Would you rather be like a wage slave in capitalism, right? That's the impulse, or sometimes people can't even find jobs, right? You're lucky if you get a job at McDonald's, depending on one's circumstance. And so it's like, the will to power, fucking sell drugs. Someone else is going to sell it, so I do. You see that with whereas like now there's this complete shift, right? It's like to consume is cool. And I think there's two factors to this. We touched on this briefly in the last podcast. I'm curious your thoughts on this. Is I think on one hand, there is the shift of the consumer society. So there is the ideology of always constant enjoyment. I know Zizek talks about this. The compulsion to always enjoy. You're like doing something wrong if you're not living your best life, and you're not consuming. Whereas instead of But there's also, I think, the spectacle, right? Which Guy Debord talks about, is the pressure to kind of always show that you're doing, rather than actually, doesn't matter whether you're actually getting the bag, doesn't matter whether you're happy, doesn't matter what you actually have. It matters what that image you project, the fucking spectacle, because we relate to each other as spectators of shit. And I think that plays a huge role in that, because you have all these people wearing fake Gucci belts or pretending to be in gangs or all this weird stuff in this postmodern age. I wonder what you think explains a sort of shift toward the consumption of drugs as opposed to merely hustling.
Yeah, and that's I think you hit the nail on the head, is that the very fact that someone is, it doesn't matter so much whether someone is productive, but they show that mode of production by the amount that they consume. And this is a very new thing in terms of post-World War II American economics, It was like we need to pump stuff out because consumption and production go hand in hand. And that you had something like Playboy magazine, where at one point being a man meant you just shut the fuck up and you got on with work. Whereas now suddenly having a martini in your hand and wearing nice suits, taking care of your hair, all this kind of stuff, suddenly it was all about, oh, well, if you want to show that you're a man, you have to consume. You have to have the best car. You have to have this and that, basically. And I feel like that's exactly what's happening at the moment, which is not only, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is it's get the bag, but also fuck the haters. And you can then suddenly, again, as you said, it's very Nietzschean. You can say, well, whoever doesn't like me is just into herd mentality.
Slave morality.
Slave morality. They're just jealous of my success and all this kind of stuff. Whereas, and I think this is the ultimate point that's missing, is that it's hyper individualistic. And because we're social beings, we need to relate to one another on a social scale. You need to have a feeling like you have a connection with the people around you. And that's the ultimate source of fulfillment and meaning, is often your relationship with other people. Whereas it's precisely the inverse that's put out, which is it's me first. I get the bag, and the people I hang out with are a representation and an extension of my individualistic success.
Tupac has a line exactly about that. I think it would work perfectly as like an intro to a future video on him. No spoilers, but Tupac has that MTV interview where he's like, the culture now is everybody just gimme, me first, right? And he talks about like Donald Trump, pretty ahead of his time. Yeah, like Donald Trump is like the epitome of like that culture. And I think Pac was really hitting on the spirit of neoliberalism, right? Which is, I would say, to a certain extent, peaking kind of in the 2000s, in the 90s, right? I would say maybe now it's kind of died and transformed into perhaps something maybe worse. I'm not sure. Who knows? But interesting nonetheless. It's a really interesting phenomenon about how kind of I really think all of this illustrates how the economic conditions and the ideology that sort of rationalizes the economic conditions go super hand in hand all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which influence, again, I think people have to see your upcoming video for a more in-depth analysis on that.
Hundo P. Anyways, one last question before I let you go is, out of all your videos, music videos that take clearly a long time to make, which of them, and this can be kind of hard because it's like choosing who your favorite kids are, but which one would you recommend people to watch first?
Oh, definitely the Baudrillard video. The Baudrillard video is the one I'm most proud of, I would definitely say, mainly because I feel like it's one of the first videos where I'm able to consistently convey the message through lyrics. Others, I feel like I'm always missing something out. But with the Baudrillard one, I feel like there's a certain encapsulation of that ideology that in the 3 verses I managed to put out. For those who haven't watched it, you can skip the first bit. It's the second bit with the beat being part of that dial-up internet connection that's being sampled. That's I'm most proud of that, I would say. I was when it finished, I was very, very excited about it.
I think that might have been the one you sent me. But yeah, anyhow, Artin, it was phenomenal having you on. I think this is one of the most interesting episodes for the listeners.
Absolute pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on.
And I really encourage all my listeners, all my viewers to check out Artin's work. If you enjoy it and you really think it's cool, share it to your friends, especially friends that like hip hop. I always thought hip hop was one of those untapped genres that could, for lack of a better term, in a Gramscian sense, be infiltrated by the Marxists, the evil cultural neo-Marxists, those evil leftist SJWs now. Anyhow, though, highly recommend you check out Artin's content. And also, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can also support me on Patreon. If you really enjoy the stuff, you get early access to all the episodes. So yeah, peace out.
Hegemony unlock one way. The shooters are ravenous the other way. The shooters are cameras, both sides, and for the blind-eyed killers. Liberal sides can't die-dyed figures. Lobbies, more guns, blood on the shirt. Body without organs, no, the alerts. Hegemony unlock one way. The shooters are ravenous the other way. The shooters are cameras, both sides, and for the blind-eyed killers. Liberal sides can't die-dyed figures. Lobbies, more guns, blood on the shirt. Body without organs, no, the alerts. Teach you to be Clash is the word that they choose. Rocks, shots, difference huge. Social Darwinists, don't get it confused. Palestine's lungs go dark as arsenic. These men are arsonists, business as usual. Even when business looking the ugliest, scorching bodies. Emperor's new clothes, walking through lobbies. Consent to content without contest. Alternatives looking like the Loch Ness. Still in there looking with a hot chest. Swim to the depths, they were part in the sand. Only alive when partisan. Hegemony unlock one way. The shooters are ravenous the other way. The shooters are cameras, both sides, and for the blind-eyed killers. Liberal sides can't die-dyed figures. Lobbies, more guns, blood on the shirt. Body without organs, no, the alerts. Hegemony unlock one way. The shooters are ravenous the other way. The shooters are cameras, both sides, and for the blind-eyed killers. Liberal sides can't die-dyed figures. Lobbies, more guns, blood on the shirt. Body without organs, no, the alerts. Teach you to be made in his image. Every century's vision, nobility to the pyramid prism. Plow in the land to the day you are risen. Colonialism in an open prison. Inmates feared by a Western vision. State that dictates life and conditions every day. Don't get it mistook. Voices bell and give hooks into the nooks. See through crannies. Pretty faces wink while they're putting your grannies. Social Darwinist. Don't get it confused. Palestine's lungs dark as arsenic. These men are arsonists. Business as usual. Look at the